I woke up on my wedding day certain nothing could ruin it, until I opened the closet and my dress was gone. My heart stopped. Every bride's nightmare had become my reality. But then I caught the flicker of triumph in my sister-in-law's eyes, the kind you can't fake. She wanted me humiliated, broken, paraded down the aisle in shame. She thought she'd buried my dream. What she didn't know was that I had something far more dangerous than her schemes. My own power, my own money, and a plan she could never see coming. When I first met Melissa, I thought I had struck gold. She greeted me with the warmth of an older sister I never had, all smiles and perfectly polished compliments. At family dinners, she would lean across the table to top off my wine, whisper advice about fitting in with the Carters, and press my hand with reassuring squeezes as if we were allies against an intimidating world. For weeks, I believed her kindness. I told myself that maybe marrying into a wealthy family didn't have to mean endless hostility, that perhaps I had been lucky enough to find not just a husband, but a sister too. On the night of our rehearsal dinner, she presented me with a small velvet box. Inside lay a delicate pair of pearl earrings. "They're family heirlooms," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness. "You deserve to wear something meaningful when you walk down the aisle." My heart swelled with gratitude. I hugged her tightly, convinced she truly wished me well. But when I slipped the earrings into my hand, I noticed something strange. A faint crack on one pearl, almost invisible. She smiled too widely as I admired them, and for a second, her eyes glinted with something sharp. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, and I brushed it off. Who questions generosity when they're about to marry the love of their life? The Carters' estate was buzzing that evening with laughter and toasts. My fiancé raised his glass to me, his voice thick with emotion, and for a fleeting moment, I thought life had finally aligned. After years of building my own career, surviving heartbreaks and proving myself, here I was, embraced, accepted, loved. The illusion was intoxicating, but illusions have a way of shattering. The night before the wedding, exhaustion pulled me into bed early. I dreamed of walking down the aisle, of white silk brushing against the carpeted floor, of the promise of a new chapter. At dawn, I stirred awake, nerves tingling, and reached for the closet where my dress hung like a guardian of my future. I slid the door open and froze. The hanger was empty. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. My dress, the hand-stitched gown I had chosen months ago, the one I had guarded like treasure, was gone. My chest tightened, panic flooding me in sharp waves. I pulled everything apart, the shelves, the boxes, even the garment bags I hadn't touched in years. Nothing. The closet stood barren, mocking me with its silence. I stumbled into the hallway, breathless. The household stirred awake with bridesmaids and relatives bustling in preparation. When I blurted out that my dress had vanished, chaos erupted. And then, like a scene from a bad play, Melissa appeared at my side, her face pale, her voice trembling. "Oh my God, Emily," she gasped, clutching my arms. "We'll find it. Don't you worry." She darted around the room, flinging open drawers, peeking beneath beds, her performance worthy of an award. To the others, she looked like a devoted sister-in-law desperate to save the day. But to me, she looked rehearsed. When our eyes met, I caught it. The flicker. That split second of victory that she hadn't masked quickly enough. Her lips pressed into a sympathetic pout, but her eyes betrayed her, gleaming with satisfaction. The room spun. Guests whispered behind their hands. A bridesmaid suggested calling the boutique. Another muttered about theft. Melissa pressed her hand to her forehead dramatically, declaring, "What kind of sick person would do this on a wedding day?" Her voice was thick with faux outrage, but I heard the undercurrent of glee. It was in that moment I understood. She had orchestrated this. The pearls, the sweet words, the hugs, all of it had been a mask. She hadn't been welcoming me. She had been waiting to strike where it hurt most, where she thought she could dismantle me in front of everyone. I held back my tears, forcing myself to stand tall in the wreckage of my missing gown. Melissa threw herself into the center of the chaos, instructing people to search the house, convincing the family that she was on my side. To them, she was the heroine. To me, she was the thief, the saboteur. As she brushed past me, placing a hand on my shoulder with exaggerated gentleness, I caught that look again, a tiny smirk buried beneath her mask of concern. And in that instant, the illusion shattered. The family I thought I was marrying into wasn't a haven, it was a stage, and Melissa was the actress, determined to make me the fool in her play. What she didn't know was that I had been an actress once too, and I knew exactly how to write my own script. The air in the bridal suite was thick with whispers and pity. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling, my breath uneven, as if I were a woman broken on the morning of her wedding. Bridesmaids circled me like mourners, exchanging sympathetic glances. Melissa knelt at my feet, squeezing my hands with exaggerated devotion, whispering, "We'll figure this out, Emily, don't cry." Her voice was saccharine, too sweet, the way poison can be masked in honey. I let a tear slide down my cheek, silent and deliberate. Let them believe I was fragile. Let Melissa think she had destroyed me. Because weakness, when used wisely, is its own kind of weapon. Inside, beneath the trembling facade, a fire burned. I had not clawed my way through years of building a company from scratch to be undone by a stolen piece of fabric. I had faced investors who doubted me, competitors who tried to bury me, and sleepless nights balancing ambition and survival. A missing dress? It was merely another obstacle. But no one could know that. Not yet. So I played my role. I allowed Melissa to bask in her false victory, to feed off the room's sympathy. She paraded around, calling the boutique, raising her voice in righteous indignation, casting herself as the heroine who would salvage my big day. Every line of her performance convinced the family more deeply that she was good, and I was pitiful. She thought she was winning. When the room finally cleared, when Melissa excused herself to make more calls, I rose from the bed and locked the door behind her shadow. My tears dried the moment the latch clicked. My reflection in the mirror was not of a defeated bride. It was of a strategist ready to take the next move in a long game. I pulled my phone from the nightstand and scrolled to a contact saved under a single word: stylist. A woman who owed me favors, who worked with the kind of gowns not displayed in shop windows, the kind whispered about in fashion circles but rarely seen in public. I pressed call. "Emily," she answered, voice hushed, professional. "Is it time?" "Yes," I said simply. "I need a miracle in 2 hours. Bring the vault." The vault wasn't literal, but it might as well have been. Within her studio were pieces designed for royalty, gowns hand-stitched with crystals, fabrics so rare they were guarded like treasures. I could afford them because I had earned them. Contracts closed, risks taken, nights sacrificed. Every dollar I would spend today was mine, not my fiancé's, not his family's, mine. 2 hours later, while the rest of the house scrambled under Melissa's stage directions, a discreet black van pulled up by the side entrance. The stylist stepped out, her assistants carrying garment bags that gleamed with promise. We moved like shadows, silent and efficient, slipping into the room without notice. She unzipped the first bag, revealing a gown that stole the air from my lungs. It wasn't just beautiful, it was a declaration. An exclusive couture piece from a Parisian house Melissa had once boasted about at dinner, swearing she would one day own. She hadn't, she couldn't, but I could, and now I would. The silk shimmered like moonlight, embroidered with threads of platinum and glass beads that caught the light in prisms. The bodice was sculpted perfection, the skirt a cascade of power disguised as elegance. This was not a dress for a woman hoping to be loved. It was a dress for a woman who commanded respect. As the stylist fastened me into it, I felt the weight of more than fabric. I felt the weight of my victories, of my independence, of every time I had chosen ambition over complacency. My reflection was no longer the trembling bride from the bed. It was a warrior cloaked in couture. Melissa's laughter echoed faintly down the hall, her voice floating through the air as she updated relatives about the disaster. She was savoring her triumph, oblivious to the storm waiting for her. I slipped on the cracked pearl earrings she had given me, not out of gratitude, but as a symbol. Let her see me wearing them when I walked past her in the gown she could never touch. Let her realize I had taken her gesture of mock kindness and turned it into irony sharp enough to cut. As the stylist smoothed the final fold of silk, she met my gaze in the mirror. "You look untouchable," she whispered. I smiled slowly, lips curving not with joy, but with certainty. My heart no longer raced with panic. It pulsed with anticipation. This wasn't the end of my wedding day. It was the beginning of a reckoning. Leaning closer to my reflection, I whispered to myself, savoring the words like a promise. This isn't the end. It's the beginning. And somewhere in the house, Melissa laughed, unaware that her victory had already slipped through her fingers. The murmurs began the moment I stepped into the ceremony hall. Heads turned, conversations cut short, and eyes widened as the gown caught the light. It wasn't just fabric, it was spectacle. The silk shimmered under the chandeliers, each bead scattering rainbows across the room. Gasps rippled like waves. Guests leaned forward, whispering, "Where did she get that?" My steps slowed, deliberate, letting the awe sink in. Melissa froze mid-sentence as she spotted me. For a heartbeat, her face drained of color, her eyes widening before she quickly rearranged herself. She forced a smile, clapping her hands together as if delighted. "Emily, you look incredible," she said, her voice just a little too high, too thin. Her cheeks flushed crimson, betraying the truth she couldn't hide. The guests saw only a gracious sister-in-law, but I saw the cracks. Her nails dug into her champagne glass. Her jaw tightened. Rage radiated through the smile she plastered on for the world. And in that instant, I savored it. For the first time that day, I breathed easily. I felt the weight of fear lift. Melissa had plotted to destroy me, to strip me of dignity, but I had not only survived, I had stolen her thunder. I turned to greet well-wishers, my laughter light, my smile confident. The compliments poured in, like royalty, a masterpiece, the most stunning bride I've ever seen. Each one was a knife twisting deeper into Melissa's pride. When my fiancé took my hand at the altar, his eyes softened with admiration. He whispered, "You look like everything I ever dreamed of." And I believed him. In that moment, the chaos of the morning felt like a distant nightmare. I thought I had won, but the illusion of victory is the cruelest trick of all. It began subtly, a shift in the atmosphere, a ripple of discontent. As the officiant prepared to begin, Melissa leaned toward her mother, her lips barely moving. The older woman's eyes flickered, hardening, then softening as though weighing something. Within minutes, the whispers started. "She spent how much?" one aunt murmured behind her hand. "Where did the money come from?" another asked, eyes narrowing at me. The tide was turning, and I felt it. Then my future mother-in-law, impeccably dressed in emerald silk, rose from her seat with the quiet authority of someone who knew the weight of her words. She smiled at the crowd, her voice smooth, clear. "Such a lavish gown," she said warmly, her tone laced with venom. "Emily is certainly making a statement today. I only hope the Carters' resources aren't drained before the marriage even begins." The room shifted instantly. Gasps. Stiffened spines. Every pair of eyes snapped toward me, no longer admiring but scrutinizing, judging. Melissa lowered her gaze modestly, as if embarrassed on my behalf, playing her role with flawless precision. I blinked, the ground tilting beneath me. This wasn't Melissa acting alone anymore. This was her aligning with the matriarch, binding their power, sealing the narrative. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of suspicion. "She's showing off!" "Using Carter money already. No wonder the dress looks expensive." It didn't matter that I had paid for the gown myself, every dollar hard-earned. To them, the truth was irrelevant. Perception was everything, and perception was slipping from my grasp. I tried to speak, to laugh it off, but my voice caught in my throat. My fiancé glanced at me, confusion in his eyes, but he didn't step in. He didn't correct his mother. He didn't defend me. And that silence spoke louder than any accusation. Melissa placed a hand delicately on her mother's arm, shaking her head as if to protect me. "She only wanted to feel beautiful," she whispered loudly enough for the nearest guests to hear. "It's not her fault she doesn't understand how things look in our family." It was brilliant, maliciously brilliant. She painted herself as compassionate, her mother as wise, and me as reckless, naive, greedy. A trifecta I couldn't escape. I felt the room constrict, the admiration curdling into suspicion. The same people who moments ago called me radiant now whispered gold digger, in tones dripping with disdain. My chest tightened. The gown that had moments earlier been my shield now felt like chains pulling me down. I saw myself reflected in their eyes, not as a bride, but as an intruder, flaunting stolen wealth. The officiant cleared his throat awkwardly, trying to regain control, but the damage was done. My moment of triumph had been twisted into proof of my alleged vanity. Melissa's gaze locked with mine across the room, a glimmer of triumph flashing in her eyes. She had taken my victory, flipped it, and turned me into the villain of my own wedding. And as the whispers grew louder, as judgment replaced awe, I realized the cruel truth. In this game, perception was the weapon, and I had underestimated just how sharp Melissa's blade could be. The officiant's voice droned in the background, but I heard nothing. My heart thudded against my ribs as whispers thickened around me, choking the air. I felt the sting of humiliation spread like fire under my skin. They saw me as greedy, shallow, undeserving, and Melissa stood across the room with that barely contained smirk, watching me burn. But she had forgotten one thing. I never play a game I haven't already prepared to win. As the crowd shifted uneasily, I slipped my hand into the folds of my gown and closed my fingers around the small silver USB drive. Hours earlier, when I discovered my dress missing, I had remembered the camera installed in the guest house hallway. A camera I had placed months ago after noticing subtle disturbances in my room. Insurance, I had called it. Today, it was justice. I stepped closer to the MC, leaning in as if requesting a private word. My lips barely moved as I whispered, "Play this. Now." His eyes widened, uncertain, but the steel in my voice left no room for refusal. Moments later, the lights dimmed, and the giant screen behind the altar flickered to life. Conversations died instantly, all eyes turned upward. Melissa tilted her head, confusion flashing across her face. The footage began. A grainy hallway the night before. The timestamp clear. A figure slipped into my suite. Melissa. Her hair was unmistakable, her posture familiar. She carried a garment bag, the exact one my gown had been stored in. The video showed her looking over her shoulder before disappearing into the shadows. Gasps erupted. A woman in the front row clutched her pearls. Another guest whispered sharply, "That's her!" Melissa shot to her feet, her face blanching, her smile cracking. This is a misunderstanding," she stammered, voice shrill. "That's not me!" But the footage rolled on, damning her further. It captured her re-emerging minutes later, the bag gone, a satisfied look on her face as she adjusted her hair in the hallway mirror before striding away. The room exploded in murmurs, heads swiveling toward her with disbelief and betrayal. Eyes that had once adored her, now pierced like knives. I stood perfectly still, my chin high, letting the evidence speak louder than I ever could. Melissa's mother, the woman who had moments ago condemned me, rose abruptly, her lips parting in shock. For once her authority faltered. Her hand trembled as she reached for Melissa's arm, but the damage had already spiraled beyond her control. Then came the second blow. Another file queued up automatically. I hadn't planned it, but the stylist must have added it after pulling archived footage. This time, it wasn't my room. It was the Carter family office. Melissa again, sliding open drawers, slipping envelopes of cash into her purse when she thought no one was watching. A collective gasp tore through the hall. She stole, someone hissed, from her own family. Melissa spun toward her mother, panic flashing. "You told me to take it. You said—" She stopped herself too late. The words rang across the silent hall like gunfire. The matriarch's face drained of color. She tried to speak, but the guests had already begun piecing the puzzle together. She had tried to protect Melissa, to bury the theft, to redirect suspicion onto me. And now, the conspiracy was unraveling in front of everyone. The dominoes fell one by one. A cousin muttered about funds missing from a family account. An uncle whispered about suspicious business losses. Every buried secret Melissa and her mother had hidden began surfacing, dragged into the light by the force of collective suspicion. Melissa's mask shattered. Gone was the gracious sister-in-law, the helpful daughter. In her place stood a cornered animal, eyes wild, chest heaving. She pointed at me with a trembling finger, her voice breaking into a shriek. "Don't you see?" she screamed. "This is all Emily's doing. She set me up. She's the liar. She's the thief. She's been manipulating all of you." The crowd stilled. Dozens of faces turned toward me, uncertainty flickering. Melissa's desperation dripped with venom, and for a heartbeat I felt the weight of every eye press against my skin again. Her words rang in the air, cutting through the silence, daring the crowd to believe her. And in that charged moment, I realized the battle wasn't over. The truth had surfaced, but Melissa still had one final card to play, turning the entire wedding into a trial, with me in the defendant's chair. The room was a battlefield littered with silence. Melissa's shrieks had echoed into nothing, swallowed by the evidence replaying in everyone's minds. No one reached to comfort her. No one defended her. Even her mother sat frozen, her emerald dress suddenly garish under the lights, her face ashen with defeat. For a brief moment, I felt the intoxicating rush of victory. I had turned the tables. I had reclaimed the stage. But victories are never clean. As the officiant cleared his throat and attempted to resume the ceremony, I noticed the atmosphere had shifted. The awe that had once filled the air was gone. Guests whispered not with admiration, but with unease. "She destroyed her own sister-in-law on her wedding day," a woman muttered, her lips barely moving. "Did she really have to humiliate her like that?" Another asked, shaking her head. "Beautiful dress." "But cruel timing," someone else added. Each word cut deeper than any of Melissa's schemes ever had. I had won the war of evidence, yes, but I had lost something intangible. The warmth, the joy, the lightness a wedding was meant to hold. It had curdled into scandal. People would remember this day not for vows or love, but for betrayal exposed under chandeliers. My gown felt heavier, no longer a symbol of triumph, but of the cost exacted for wielding truth as a blade. When I looked at my fiancé, his smile was strained, his eyes clouded. He pressed my hand, but it lacked conviction, the way one reassures a child after a nightmare they cannot erase. He didn't speak up. He didn't comfort me. He just endured. Later, as the crowd dispersed for the reception, the air thick with hushed speculation, I slipped away to the bridal suite. The room was still, the chaos of the morning replaced with suffocating quiet. I pulled the earrings from my ears, the pearls dull under the lamplight, and stared at myself in the mirror. For a moment, I didn't recognize the woman gazing back. She looked regal, yes, victorious, but also hollow. The door creaked open. My fiancé stepped inside, closing it softly behind him. His expression was weary, as though he had aged in hours. "Emily," he began, his voice low, "you didn't have to do that." I turned, heat rising in my chest. Didn't have to? She stole my dress. She humiliated me. I know, he interrupted, his eyes darting away. I knew. The words froze me in place. What do you mean you knew? He sank into a chair, running a hand through his hair. Melissa. She's always been jealous. I suspected she might try something. I even overheard her on the phone a week ago bragging to a friend about ruining your big day. I stared at him, my pulse pounding in my ears. And you didn't tell me? I didn't want drama, he whispered. I thought if I stayed out of it, it would blow over. I thought you'd be stronger for handling it yourself. His words landed like stones, not out of malice, but out of cowardice. He had known, and he had chosen silence. He had left me to suffer, to fight alone because it was easier for him. In that moment, Melissa no longer felt like the true enemy. Her betrayal had been vicious but predictable. It was my fiancé's passivity, his refusal to stand beside me, that gutted me most. The one person I trusted above all had seen the storm coming and let it crash over me without warning. The weight of my gown pressed against my chest, suffocating. I reached behind me, loosening the zipper, and let the fabric fall in heavy waves around my feet. Standing in nothing but the slip beneath, I felt exposed, raw. I sank into the chair across from him, my voice barely a whisper. Did I really win? He didn't answer. And in the silence, I realized the truth. Power had given me justice, but it had stolen peace. The reception hall shimmered with soft light, but the joy that should have filled it hung thin, brittle, fragile as glass. Guests clustered in small circles, whispering, casting sideways glances at me as if I were both victor and villain. My gown lay abandoned upstairs, and though I stood now in a simpler slip, I felt lighter without its weight. Melissa had vanished, dragged away by her mother in a storm of shame. Yet even in her absence, the stain of what had unfolded lingered in every corner of the room, and my fiancé, my husband now, hovered nearby, quiet, unsure, his silence still echoing louder than any vow we had exchanged. I lifted a glass of champagne, not to toast, but to steady my trembling fingers. For the first time since morning, I realized the truth. Revenge had given me satisfaction, but not peace. Justice had unmasked Melissa, but the price was an emptiness no audience applause could fill. I walked toward the center of the room, every step deliberate, every eye turning toward me. Conversation stilled, the air tightening with expectation. They waited for me to gloat, to strike again, to pour salt into wounds. Instead, I lifted the microphone from its stand and let the silence stretch. My dress was stolen, I began, my voice steady, resonant. My dignity was targeted. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and instead, it became a battlefield. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, others shifted uncomfortably. I drew in a breath. But I need you to hear this. I built my own empire before this marriage. Every dollar I've spent, every success I've claimed, it is mine. I never needed this family's money or their approval to validate my worth. Gasps. Silence. My eyes scanned the room, meeting their stares one by one. I don't need to win a war to feel powerful. What I need is peace, and I won't let anyone, family or otherwise, drag me into cycles of jealousy and revenge. That ends here. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, slowly, applause began. Tentative at first, then swelling, rolling through the room. Guests who had whispered behind my back now looked at me with something new, not pity, not suspicion, but respect. Some even with awe. I lowered the microphone, my heart pounding, my throat tight with emotion. This was not the victory Melissa had tried to rob me of, nor the one I had seized by force. This was something different, something higher. Later, as the music began and couples drifted to the dance floor, I stood on the sidelines, watching. My new husband approached, his hand outstretched. His smile was weary but sincere, his eyes pleading for a chance to bridge the silence between us. I hesitated, then placed my hand in his. Together we stepped onto the floor, the rhythm carrying us in slow circles. To the watching eyes, we looked like a couple in love, swaying gently in the glow of chandeliers. But inside, my thoughts drifted elsewhere. I saw Melissa stripped of her power, her lies unraveling. She was no longer the golden child, no longer untouchable. She had been removed from the center of the family's world, a queen dethroned by her own schemes. And me, I had become something else entirely. Not just a bride, not just a victim, but a woman who had survived betrayal, humiliation, and the temptation of vengeance. A woman who had chosen to rise above, to redefine power, not as destruction, but as restraint. Yet even as I smiled, as the music swelled, I felt the weight of what had been lost. The innocence of the day was gone, replaced by scars invisible, but lasting. I held my husband's hand, but my gaze wandered past him, distant, reflective. I thought of the pearls still lying on the vanity upstairs, fractured and imperfect, symbols of Melissa's false kindness. I thought of the gown abandoned on the floor, its shimmer tainted by scandal. And I thought of the empire I had built, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice, and how it was the one thing that had carried me through when no one else had. The song ended, and applause filled the hall again. I curtsied lightly, smiling, playing my role, but inside, I knew the truth. I had won, yes, but I had paid a price that no gown or victory could erase. As the night wore on, guests approached with words of admiration, their tones softer now, reverent even. They no longer saw me as the bride who destroyed her sister-in-law, but as a woman who had stood in fire and walked out unburned, a woman who had transcended. And yet, as I finally slipped away from the crowd, stepping onto the balcony where cool night air kissed my skin, I let my smile fade. The stars stretched endless above, uncaring of the battles fought beneath them. I whispered into the silence, more to myself than anyone else. Did I really win, or did I just survive? No answer came, only the wind. But maybe that was the point. Winning wasn't about applause or vindication. It wasn't even about survival. It was about refusing to be defined by betrayal. I stood there, a queen who had won but carried the cost in her bones, staring into the horizon with eyes that had seen both ruin and redemption. And somewhere deep down, I knew this was not an ending, but the beginning of a new order, one I would write myself,